The summer heat was not what made the Caldwell house feel unbearable. It was something quieter than that. Something that had no name but lived in the space between two people who had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, how to be in the same room without the air going thin. Lavinia had noticed it the way you notice a draft through a wall, slowly, then all at once. She was 24 years old and she had been married to Mr. Caldwell, to Warren, for 3 years. 3 years was long enough to know the sound his boots made on the stairs, and know from the rhythm whether he was in a mood to be spoken to or not. Long enough to have stopped setting a second candle on the table when she read in the evenings, because he never came in to sit with her. Long enough to have replaced the small hope she'd once had, the flicker of it, anyway, with something more useful, routine. She rose at 5:30. She oversaw the kitchen, managed the accounts Warren left in a pile on his desk every Friday, and received the weekly visits from Mrs. Hartwell, the housekeeper they shared with the neighboring Caldwell family property on the east side of the ridge. She wrote letters to her mother in Fredericksburg, Virginia, careful letters that said nothing that was true. She pressed wildflowers in the back of her Bible. She learned to take up very little space. It had been an arrangement between families. Her father had been clear about that, not unkindly, the spring she turned 21. The Caldwells were a name in Shenandoah County, and her family, the Marshes, had a name in Fredericksburg that needed the kind of reinforcement that a practical alliance could provide. Warren was 31 and already established. He had 112 acres, a working mill, and a house that didn't leak. He had never been cruel to her. He had also never been much interested in her. On the evening that changed everything, Lavinia had been in the hallway outside Warren's study, without intending to be there at all. She had been returning a ledger, one of the quarterly accounts she'd cross-referenced and corrected, as she did every quarter, quietly, without being asked and without being thanked. The door was not quite shut. She could hear voices inside, men's voices, and she recognized them. Warren, his older brother Clifford, and a man named Doyle who came up from Woodstock every so often to talk business and drink Warren's whiskey. She had not planned to listen. She stopped only because she heard her own name. Lavinia, Warren was saying, and there was a tone in his voice she had never once heard him use with her. Relaxed, almost amused. She tallies figures. She's useful that way. Someone laughed. Doyle, she thought. The short bark of a laugh she associated with him. Useful, Clifford repeated. That's a diplomatic word. It's the honest word, Warren said. A man doesn't marry a woman for stimulating conversation, Clifford. He marries her because it makes sense. The Marsh name helps in Fredericksburg, and she runs the house without complaint. That's more than most men get without complaint, Doyle said. She's well trained, then. Like a good setter, Clifford said. Quiet, does what it's told, doesn't chew the furniture. The laughter that followed was easy and long. Lavinia stood in the hallway with the ledger in her hands and did not move. She was aware of the particular stillness that comes over a person when they hear something that rearranges them. Not a thing that surprises them. No, it wasn't that. The words were almost familiar, almost things she had already known in some wordless way, and that was the worst of it. She hadn't been stunned. She'd been confirmed. She walked back to her room. She sat down at the edge of the bed. She thought about what she had been before she came to this house. She had been, she thought, someone who laughed at certain things and had opinions about them. Someone who had read Wollstonecraft in secret and argued with her cousin Delia about whether argument was useful. Someone who had wanted. She had not let herself think about what she had wanted in a very long time. The ring on her left hand was a thin gold band that had belonged to Warren's grandmother. She had been told this as though it were an honor. She took it off. She set it on the nightstand. She looked at it for a moment the way you look at a thing you've worn so long you forgot it was there. Then she opened her trunk. She was not foolish about it. She would not let herself be foolish. She took out her winter coat and folded it over her arm. She packed her good shoes and her second dress, and the blue shawl her mother had given her. Not because she loved it, but because it was wool, and the nights were cold even in summer up in the valley. She took the small case she kept in the bottom of the trunk and counted what was inside. $41.60, carefully gathered from the household accounts, over 18 months. Not stolen so much as quietly redirected. She took her Bible and the letters from her mother, and a small leather journal that had 3 years of observations in it, that no one had ever read. She did not take the ledger. She left it on the desk in the hallway, where she had been standing, when she heard what her husband thought of her. It was just past 10 o'clock at night. The men were still in the study. She could hear the low rumble of their voices as she went down the back stairs, through the kitchen. She took the bread that was cooling on the rack and put it in the canvas bag, because she was going to need to eat. And out through the door that opened to the kitchen garden. The air outside was warm and smelled of hay and late summer. The stars were fully out. She stood for a moment on the flagstone path and breathed. Then she started walking. The road south out of the valley was one she knew well enough. She had ridden it a dozen times, but she had never walked it, and she discovered quickly that it was a different thing entirely. The gravel was uneven under her boots. The trees on either side were dark and close. About 2 miles out, something moved in the brush and she stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds before she understood it was a dog, not anything larger. She walked for what she calculated to be 4 miles before she heard a wagon behind her. She moved to the side of the road and did not turn around, because she did not know yet what she was going to do if it stopped. It stopped. "Ma'am," it was a woman's voice. Lavinia turned. The wagon was a farm wagon pulled by an old brown horse, and the woman driving it was perhaps 60. Heavyset, wearing a bonnet that had seen better years. In the back of the wagon were burlap sacks and a wooden crate of what appeared to be root vegetables. "It's near midnight," the woman said. "Where are you headed?" "South," Lavinia said. "Toward the Strasbourg Road. That's 12 miles yet." The woman looked at her for a moment with the kind of look that asked questions without asking them. "I'm going as far as Cavtown. You're welcome to ride. I don't want to trouble you. You're not troubling me. I'm going anyway." The woman's name was Mrs. Garland. She offered this after they'd been riding in silence for a few minutes, in the practical way of someone who felt names were useful information rather than intimacy. She asked no questions. She drove with the ease of a woman who had driven alone in the dark many times and had no particular feelings about it. After a while she said, "Running, or going to?" "Both," she said. Mrs. Garland nodded as though this was a reasonable answer. "Good," she said. "The ones who are only running don't usually get where they're trying to go." They rode in silence after that. Lavinia watched the valley give way to foothills and thought about where she was going. She had a destination. She had not been entirely without a plan. 6 months ago, she'd received a letter from her mother that mentioned, almost in passing, that her great-aunt Vera, her mother's father's sister, a woman Lavinia had met perhaps 3 times in her life, had died the previous winter and left her property in Hardy County to her nearest female relation, there being no male heirs. The property had passed through 2 courts and some confusion about the deed, and it had taken until spring to be confirmed. Her mother had written, "It will probably need a great deal of work, but it belongs to you now, Lavinia. Some 80-odd acres near the South Branch. I thought you'd want to know." And then the letter had moved on to other things. Lavinia had read that paragraph 11 times. She had put the letter in her journal and not told Warren. She had not been ready then. She was ready now. Mrs. Garland dropped her at the crossroads outside Cavtown, as the sky was beginning to think about lightening. They shook hands, which felt right. Lavinia stood at the crossroads with her bag and her coat and thought about the next 14 miles. She found a room for a night at an inn in Moorfield, a small town that smelled of the river. The woman who ran it, a Mrs. Peck, gave her a room on the 2nd floor with a window that looked east, and charged her a fair price, and asked nothing about why she was traveling alone with a canvas bag and no trunk. People in Moorfield, it seemed, had the good manners not to ask. In the morning, Lavinia sat at the small desk in the room and wrote 3 letters. The first was to her mother. She told the truth for once, not all of it, but the important parts. She said she had left Warren's house and was going to the Hardy County property and would write again when she arrived. She said she was not in danger and did not require rescuing, but that she would be glad of her mother's counsel when the time came. She wrote, "I know this is not what was planned. I am finding that plans made for you rarely account for the person you actually are." The second letter was to a solicitor in Moorfield, whose name she'd found in a directory at the inn's front desk. She wrote in the formal language she'd learned from 3 years of managing Warren's correspondence, and asked for an appointment to review the status of the Hardy County property deed, and also, she paused here, and then wrote it plainly, to inquire about the legal process for dissolving a marriage. The third letter was shorter. It was addressed to Warren. She wrote, "I have returned your grandmother's ring to the nightstand in the east bedroom. I am not coming back. I wish you no particular harm. I hope you find someone who suits you better, which should not be difficult, since it appears your primary requirement is a quiet disposition and a head for figures. I have the figures. I'm taking them with me." She sealed all 3 letters. She went downstairs, paid Mrs. Peck for an extra night and a horse rental, to take her as far as the Pendleton County line. and ate a breakfast of eggs and salt pork and fresh bread that tasted, for reasons she couldn't entirely explain, like something she hadn't had in years. The Hardy County property was not as she had imagined it. It was as she had hoped it might be. The house was a stone farmhouse, 2 stories, solid-walled, set back from the road behind a stand of old chestnut trees. It had been empty for the better part of 2 years since Vera's death, and it showed this. The garden was gone to seed, one of the shutters on the upper floor had come loose from its hinge, and the kitchen pump required coaxing. But the bones of the place were sound. The roof held. The floors were oak. The fireplace in the front room was deep and well built, and when she found wood stacked in the small barn and got a fire going that evening, the chimney drew cleanly without smoking. She sat in front of the fire, that first night with her journal open on her knee and thought, "This is a room that has never been silent the way that other house was silent. This is a different kind of quiet." She wrote in her journal for an hour. Then she made a list, which was something she was good at. The list had 2 columns. One was what needed to be done. The other was what she needed to figure out how to do. The lists were long. She looked at them for a long time and then added items she'd forgotten. Then she closed the journal and went to bed. She slept through the night for the first time, and she could not remember how long. In the weeks that followed, Lavinia learned things about herself that 3 years in the Caldwell house had not given her occasion to learn. She learned that she could haul water, if it came to it. That she could negotiate for lumber with a man who assumed she was negotiating on behalf of a husband, and was surprised, twice, when she quoted him price per board foot and asked about the grade of the pine. That she could kill a chicken, though she did not enjoy it. That she could make reasonable decisions about which 60 of the 83 acres were worth clearing first, and which could wait until she had income. That she could sit through a meeting with a solicitor, a youngish man named Mr. Fenn, who she'd initially doubted and then revised her opinion of after he turned out to be precise and fair, and come out of it knowing exactly what she owned and what she owed and what her options were. The property was hers outright. Vera had been a canny woman in ways the family hadn't fully appreciated. The deed was clean. There was a small existing lease on the easternmost 20 acres, a farming lease with a family named Brackett, who had been working the land for 8 years and wanted to continue. Lavinia rode out to meet them. A husband and wife, both weathered, both wary, and they talked for an hour in the field, and she extended the lease on adjusted terms that were fairer than the previous ones. And the wife, a woman named Brackett, shook her hand at the end with a firmness that felt like something earned. The divorce was slower. Mr. Fenn had been straightforward about that. Virginia law in 1831 was not generous on the matter. It would take time, filings, possibly a legislative petition. Warren had not contested anything. She had half expected him to, out of pride if nothing else. But it seemed that he too found it easier not to make a scene. He had sent one letter through his own solicitor, a formal and minimal document that contained no personal words at all. She found that she had nothing to feel about this, which was its own kind of conclusion. By October, Lavinia had the south field cleared and the fence line rebuilt. She had negotiated a water access agreement with the neighboring landowner, a taciturn older man named Mr. Sayer, who had initially sent his son to manage the conversation, and then, after meeting Lavinia himself, begun dealing with her directly. She had hired a farmhand named Pete, who was 17 and enormously competent, and had no opinions about whether a woman should be running her own land. She had started a kitchen garden on the west side of the house. She had also begun quietly to tell her story to the women she met. Not the dramatic version. Not the version where she'd stood in a hallway and had her life reordered in 3 minutes. The practical version. The version that answered the question she had once had and had found no one to ask. What do you do with the deed? What does it cost to file? Where do you even start? Mrs. Garland came through once, in September, driving a new wagon. She stopped and looked at the place and said, with the approval of someone who noticed practical things, "You've done work here." "Still a great deal left," Lavinia said. "There always is," Mrs. Garland said. "And then, there's a woman over in Wardensville. Young. Been asking around about whether there's anyone who'd know about land deeds and such. I told her I might know someone. That all right?" Lavinia thought about it for a moment. "Send her to me," she said. The woman from Wardensville came the following week. Her name was Lucy. She was 26 and had been left a small parcel of land by her father, and had no idea what to do with it, and a husband who wanted to sell it and keep the money. She sat in Lavinia's kitchen and was given tea and information in that order. She left with Mr. Fenn's address, a copy of the relevant county statutes that Lavinia had written out by hand, and because she looked like she hadn't eaten properly in several days, the better part of a loaf of bread. 3 weeks after that, Lucy wrote to say she had gone to see Mr. Fenn and the land was hers. Lavinia read the letter twice. Then she put it in the back of her journal, with the letter from her mother that had mentioned the 80-odd acres, and the letter she'd written to Warren that she'd kept a copy of, and the list she'd made on her first night in front of the fire. She went and stood at the window that faced south, where the cleared field was visible in the early November light, brown and stubbled. But there, definitive, real. She thought about the woman she had been in the hallway outside her husband's study, holding a ledger, not yet knowing what she was going to do. She thought about how strange it was that the thing that had broken her open had not been grief or rage. Exactly. It had been clarity. The moment of hearing herself described, useful, well-trained, doesn't chew the furniture, and recognizing that none of those words were her, that she had been somewhere else, in a story that wasn't hers, playing a part no one had asked her if she wanted. She had walked out of it, on a summer night with $41.60 and a loaf of bread. The farm in November was its own kind of beautiful, not the kind that asked to be noticed, the kind that was simply there if you were paying attention. The frost on the south field stubble in the early mornings, the sound of the river on the eastern boundary when the wind was from the right direction, the good solid smell of wood smoke that filled the house after she got the morning fire going. She had 83 acres. She had a lease-producing income and a second field nearly ready for spring. She had a solicitor and a farmhand and a neighbor who had stopped sending his son as an intermediary. She had her name on the deed. She was finding a great many things she had not known she was capable of wanting, because no one had thought to ask, and she had not thought to say. On the last evening of November she lit 2 candles. She lit 2 now, always, out of something that was not quite habit yet, and opened her journal to a fresh page. She wrote the date at the top. She thought for a moment about what to write. Then she wrote, "This is the first winter I have felt entirely like myself." She didn't add anything after that. It was enough on its own. She read it once, and then she closed the book, and the fire settled in the grate, and outside the Hardy County night was clear and cold and full of stars.